The mashed potatoes were still warm when the knife went in, not the one on the table, but the one my mother drove through my back with 10 quiet words. "We voted," she said, rising from her seat and lifting her wine glass like a queen making a toast. "And you're not family anymore." Silence fell. Then came the clinking of cutlery being set down. Then a pause. And then they clapped. Some hesitated. My cousin Marla looked uncomfortable, but she clapped anyway. My brother grinned like this was the punchline to an inside joke. My aunt laughed loudest, like she'd been waiting years for this. I looked around the table, this table I helped pay for, in a house partially bought with the savings I once handed over, just until things get better. Faces eyed, fed, supported, comforted when things fell apart. My seat suddenly felt cold. I blinked once. No tears, just a strange stillness settling inside me. My mother stared at me with a smug calmness. "It's nothing personal," she added, as if that made it better. "We just think it's time you learned that being useful doesn't mean you belong." I could feel my heart pounding, not out of pain, but out of clarity. I stood up slowly, smoothing the fabric of my dress, and reached into my bag. They all watched with mild curiosity. I pulled out a thick folder, a pale beige one, crisp and heavy. I placed it gently on the center of the table, right next to the half-carved turkey. "Then I guess," I said softly, "you won't need this." My mother raised an eyebrow, reached for it with a smirk still dancing on her lips. She flipped it open, and then she screamed, a sharp, guttural sound, not of fear, but of shock and fury. It sliced through the room like broken glass. My brother stood up, alarmed. "What the hell is this?" She kept flipping through the pages, her voice climbing. This is a joke, right? This isn't legal. You can't do this." But I could, and I had. They didn't know that while they were plotting to vote me out like a bad habit, I had already written them out of the foundation they stood on. No one at the table spoke. The laughter died. Marla's fork clinked to the floor. My aunt's mouth hung open, suddenly unsure. I looked around again, this time not searching for validation, but soaking in the last glimpse of something I had finally outgrown. My name is Zara, and from wherever you're watching this video, stay with me, because some families raise daughters. Others raise replacements until the replacement walks away with everything. When I was 9, I learned how to unclog a sink, not because I wanted to, because my mother said, "You're the oldest, figure it out." When I was 11, I started babysitting my siblings after school. By 13, I was cooking dinner. By 16, I had 2 part-time jobs, one after school, one on weekends. And by 18, I was paying the electric bill while my younger brother played video games in an air-conditioned room. That was my role, not daughter, not child, caretaker, provider, ghost. They said things like, "Zara's so responsible," when it was convenient. But when things went wrong, the tone shifted. "Why didn't you remind me? Why didn't you handle it?" Zara should have known better. I was the built-in backup plan. And somewhere along the way, I stopped waiting for thank yous. Not because I didn't need them, but because I knew they'd never come. My brother, Liam, was the golden child. Always praised for doing the bare minimum. Got a standing ovation for passing his math test, while I silently pulled straight A's and brought home groceries on the same day. If I got tired, I was moody. If he got tired, he was overwhelmed. Even when I tried to speak up to say, "I'm stretched too thin," my mother would sigh and say, "You're just being dramatic. Your siblings are younger. They need you." But I needed someone too. She never saw that. To her, I wasn't someone you comforted. I was someone you relied on. Useful, dependable, replaceable if I ever stopped serving her needs. She never hugged me unless someone else was watching. Never once asked about my dreams. I was the child who did, not the child who was. And the older I got, the more invisible I became. Even when I moved out for college, on a partial scholarship I earned entirely on my own, she called me every week. Not to ask how I was, but to ask for money. Just a bit to cover groceries. "Can you send something for Liam's books? Rent's a little tight this month." And every time I gave, because I thought maybe if I gave enough, she'd finally say, "I'm proud of you." She never did. The one time I asked her, just once, if she appreciated what I'd done, she looked me in the eye and said, "You're just doing what any decent daughter would." You act like we should throw a parade. No, I didn't want a parade. I wanted a mother. Instead, I got a boss. A cold manager who audited my existence and only acknowledged me when I hit her expectations. Eventually, I stopped asking for warmth, stopped chasing applause, and buried the version of me that still believed love was something I could earn. I was the invisible daughter, but invisible doesn't mean weak. It just means they won't see you coming when you finally rise. It started with a laugh, the kind that stings more than it should. I was in the hallway during a family gathering, getting water from the kitchen when I heard my sister, Ava, talking to one of our cousins in the living room. She's not really one of us, she said, almost playfully. I mean, Zara's like staff. Reliable. Not fun. They both laughed. I didn't move. I just stood there, back pressed to the wall, heart thudding in my chest. Not one of us. Staff. Like I was the live-in help who'd overstayed her welcome. I let the water run, let it overflow. I needed something to drown out the sound of that truth settling in. Later that evening, I saw a photo on Instagram, my cousin's wedding. A big family event. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. There was no text, no call, not even a forwarded invitation. I confronted Ava. Her response? A shrug. We figured you'd be busy. And you're not really close with that side of the family, right? I babysat her for 2 years, I replied. Ava blinked. Still, that's when I started looking more closely. At the group chats, one of them renamed without me, another quietly archived. Family photos that used to be tagged with my name. Suddenly, I was cropped out or simply left untagged. Holiday plans discussed in whispers, always spur of the moment, but somehow always organized without me. One day, I walked into the room and my brother Liam was joking with my cousin Jonah. Zara's just the intern of this family, he said, chuckling. Jonah laughed harder than he should have. What does that even mean? I asked. They both looked up, surprised. A little guilty, but Liam covered it well. Come on, don't be sensitive. You know you're the one who handles everything. We're just messing around. But they weren't. I wasn't one of them. I was the help desk. I started paying attention, saving screenshots, copying messages, documenting when they asked me for things, and how they spoke about me when they thought I wasn't listening. Every favor I did became a receipt. Every insult, verbal or silent, became evidence. Not because I wanted revenge. Not yet. But because something inside me had cracked, and I needed to remember why. I stopped offering help. Stopped answering every late-night call. Stopped picking up extra groceries just because I knew what brands they liked. And I started watching. What I saw was clear. They didn't just take me for granted. They'd already decided I didn't belong. They just hadn't said it to my face yet. But when they did, when my mother stood at that Thanksgiving table and said, "We voted," I wasn't surprised. Because by then, I'd already been counting the votes myself. They thought I was just the help. Just the girl who showed up when the lights needed fixing, when the fridge was empty, when tuition deadlines loomed and Dad's car needed repairs. But what they didn't know, what they never bothered to pay attention to, was whose name was on the receipts. Mine. The mortgage? Half of it had been refinanced under my credit when Mom was denied the loan. I'd signed those papers at 24 because they said, "You're our best shot." The tuition payments for Liam? They came from my account, not once, not twice, but every semester, quietly on time. Even the lawyer they'd used last year to get Aunt May out of that messy property dispute? My retainer. My contact. They used my name like it was an access key, and I let them. I thought it made me part of something. But now I saw it for what it was, liability. So I hired a lawyer. Not for war, but for order. Her name was Trina. Sharp suit, sharper mind. She listened without flinching as I laid it all out. Every payment, every asset, every document that linked me to a family that had voted me out before they realized I'd been holding the ceiling up. Trina was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Do you want to pull out?" I looked her in the eye. "I want to take back what's mine." And so we began. The first step was protection. I bought a modest one-bedroom condo under a trust, away from the neighborhood I grew up in. Cozy, safe mine. No one knew the address but me. Next came the paper trail. Utilities for the family home? I'd been the guarantor for years. They were legally tied to me. We had them formally removed, every account cut off or reassigned. Property tax on the house? My name was still listed as the secondary payer. I submitted documents to clear that. Effective immediately, if the taxes lapsed, I wouldn't be responsible, they would. And then came the inheritance. My grandmother left me a portion of her land in her will, a quiet plot, sold years ago by my mother behind closed doors. But the records weren't buried deep enough. Trina found them. Turns out that sale had been illegal. The proceeds had to be returned or accounted for, and we filed a claim. By the time we were done, I had a folder. A beautiful, heavy folder. Inside it was the slow unraveling of every financial string they'd ever tied to me. Legal notices, ownership transfers, waivers, proof of control, proof of release. I didn't do it out of rage. I did out of peace. Because if they were going to erase me from the family, I'd erase my support right back. But I'd do it clean. They thought they were setting me free. What they didn't know was I'd already opened the door myself. My mother's fingers trembled as she flipped through the folder, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against paper that felt, for the first time, heavier than gold. The first document was the deed update, legal, notarized, stating I was no longer a financial cosigner on the house. The moment it landed in her name alone, so did the overdue taxes I'd been covering quietly for the past 2 years. The second page was a bank termination form. I had formally withdrawn my name from the joint emergency account. The same account she dipped into every time things were tight without asking. Third was the power of attorney reversal. Years ago, she'd tricked me into signing it during Dad's health scare. Said it's just paperwork. We need a backup. That backup just ended. Permanently. And finally, the real dagger. Proof of inheritance reversal. The proceeds from Grandma's land sale? Frozen. Reclaimed. And under legal review for compensation fraud. She went pale. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Just a gasp, low and animalistic, the kind of noise people make when they realize the game is over and they weren't even playing the right board. Then she screamed. A full-throated, no longer in control scream. Liam stood up, confused. What's going on? Aunt Denise grabbed the folder and scanned the pages, her face draining with every line she read. Is this real? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Around the table, the atmosphere changed, celebration curdling into shock. The woman they had just voted out wasn't the weak link. She was the foundation, and now the ground was crumbling. Some tried to speak. Others just stared. A few avoided my eyes completely, like looking at me might burn. I picked up my bag, took one last look at the table, the linen cloth I bought last Christmas, the silverware I donated after their wedding anniversary, the dishes I once stayed up to wash while everyone else laughed in the living room. And I smiled. Not wide. Just enough. I wish you all the best, I said quietly. No yelling. No drama. No final monologue. Just truth. A clean exit. I turned and walked out. Past the dining room. Through the hallway. Into the crisp November air. My heels clicked against the porch. Steady, unbothered. Behind me, voices collided. What do we do now? She can't do this. Is this a joke? But I didn't turn back. Because when someone shows you you're not family, the best thing you can do is let them live in the silence they tried to build around you, and see how loud it gets when you're no longer there to fill it. I stepped into my car, closed the door, and exhaled. For the first time in years, I felt light. 3 weeks later, a red notice was taped to the front door of the house I grew up in. Property under review for tax seizure. The county had sent multiple warnings, all of which had been previously redirected to me. Quietly, I'd been paying them to protect the home, even though I wasn't living there. But not anymore. Now, those unpaid dues were public. Liam called first. His voice was tight, frantic. Zara, my tuition payment didn't go through. What the hell is going on? I leaned back in my desk chair, calmly flipping through a notebook. You mean the fund I set up? The one under my name. You can't just. I didn't, I said, cutting him off. You did, when you voted me out. Click. Then Ava tried. Zara, Mom's not sleeping. She's been sick over this. You've always been the mature one. Can't you just fix it? I laughed once, quietly. I was always the one who cleaned up your messes. Now you'll learn how to live in them. The news spread quickly. A cousin DM'd me on Instagram. Is it true your mom lost the house? An aunt called to say, we never meant to hurt you. Even Uncle Hassan, who hadn't called in 5 years, sent a voice note that started with, your mother's not well, and ended with, maybe you've made your point. But I hadn't done it for a point. I'd done it for peace. And that peace meant no longer carrying guilt I didn't earn. When Mom finally called, not texted, not emailed, but actually called, I let it ring 4 times before answering. Her voice was brittle. Zara, you ruined us. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shake. I just let the words settle. Then I said, you voted. Pause. I just honored it. She didn't know what to say to that. I imagined she thought her guilt would work like it used to, as a hook to drag me back in. But I wasn't that version of me anymore. The version who said yes just to keep the peace. The version who gave everything to be seen as good. The version who mistook usefulness for love. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood that boundaries are not betrayal. I wasn't their savior. I wasn't their ATM. I wasn't their fallback. I was free. And freedom comes with echo, the kind of silence that rings in the ears of those who never thought they'd lose you. I stood in front of the courthouse holding the simplest piece of paper I'd ever fought for, a legal name change. No fanfare, no drama, just a quiet goodbye to the last name that had followed me like a shadow I never chose. The name that reminded me of slammed doors, of being silenced, of being needed but never loved. I signed the form, took a breath, and whispered, that chapter's closed. From that day on, I carried a name that belonged to me. Not to the family that cast me out, but to the woman I'd become. Not long after, I launched the Daughters Unseen, a nonprofit for women like me. Women who had been the strong one in families that only knew how to take. Women raised in silence, told to shrink themselves, then blamed for the cracks in everything. We offered workshops, legal guidance, storytelling circles, healing retreats. But more than that, we offered validation. Because sometimes the greatest gift you can give a woman is to look her in the eyes and say, you were never the problem. I shared my own story in an essay called The Vote That Freed Me. It went viral. Thousands of shares. Emails from strangers who said, this is my life. Messages from women who had never told a soul what they'd been through until they read my words. Suddenly, I wasn't invisible. But more importantly, I wasn't alone. I found people who didn't expect me to earn love with labor. Friends who showed up without asking for anything. Women who called me sister, not because of blood, but because we'd bled the same way. And somewhere along the way, my smile came back. Not the polite, practiced smile I wore at family dinners. Not the tired, I'm fine, smile that masked exhaustion. But a real one. Soft, quiet, mine. For the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone's permission to exist. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building, reclaiming, living. And this time, everything I built had my name on it. 1 year later, the scent of roasted vegetables and cinnamon filled my apartment, my home. The table was set with mismatched plates. Laughter echoed from the kitchen, and the living room glowed with candles instead of tension. It was Thanksgiving, but this time, no one was performing. No one was waiting for me to clean up after them. No one whispered behind my back. No one held a secret vote about whether I deserved a place at the table. These people, my friends, my chosen family, brought food, stories, warmth. We clinked glasses over shared healing and cornbread. Midway through dinner, Cam, my friend from the nonprofit, leaned over and asked gently, "Do you ever miss them?" I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I finally felt free enough to say it out loud. "No," I said, "because I never had them." She nodded, no judgment in her eyes, just understanding. After everyone left, I stood alone in the hallway, barefoot, wine glass in hand, letting the quiet settle. Not the suffocating kind, but the peaceful kind, like exhaling for the first time after holding your breath for years. I looked at the frame I'd hung earlier that day. Inside, it was the first page from the folder. The deed transfer, the start of my freedom. I'd mounted it like art, not out of spite, but as a reminder of the moment I reclaimed my life. The pen I used to sign those papers now sat in a shadow box beside it. And I smiled, because now every door in this home opened with my key. Every corner held joy, not judgment. Every chair welcomed the right people, no votes needed. They thought they could vote me out. They didn't know I held the pen.